was talking about how every kid that I see now is attempting the three-point shot. And I wonder on some level. So let me give you my thesis about why the three-point shot has taken over. Obviously, the easy answer is it's just more valuable. But I think it's a bigger story than that. The players that make three-point shots are fundamentally playing a different style of basketball than most of us grew up playing. And let me explain what I mean by this. If you are around my age or, probably within 20 years of my age almost, you grew up in a basketball world where there were 5 positions, right? Point guard was the 1 and the center was the 5. And every one of those positions had a defined value in which he was expected to play. And I'll give you an example from my generation growing up in the NBA. Anthony Hardaway, even though he was a big point guard, was a prototypical 1, and he played with the Orlando Magic with Shaquille O'Neal, who was a prototypical 5. That was the point guard and the center had defined differences in the way they played. Shaquille O'Neal, by and large, was not ever going to handle the basketball. He was going to score around the basket. Anthony Hardaway was going to handle the ball pretty much everywhere else. Okay? We'll go back in time and discuss, for instance, the old school Bulls, right? Steve Kerr is the shooting guard on the second of the three-peat teams. Michael Jordan, kind of, with the triangle, the way that things worked. He is shooting guard, but also really kind of able to do a lot of things. But then you've got B.J. Armstrong, who was the prototypical point guard back in the day. You've got Scottie Pippen, who was sort of your standard wing player. Horace Grant, who would have been like your, and I might be mixing up all the different teams, so I'm just kind of putting them in context, was your solid 4. And then you had your Luke Longley, your Bill Cartwrights, your Bill Winningtons, who were your big, stiff 5s, right? And if you remember on that Bulls era team, Tony Kukoc came in, right? And in the second tier, and the players didn't really welcome Kukoc because he was a Euro. And I think it was Dirk Nowitzki who really kind of blew up the Euro model in terms of it's not a criticism anymore. But the Euro model was a lot different than the American model for how basketball was played. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is if you think about basketball in a traditional American sense, the 1 through the 5 and the numerical positions, point guard, center, having very defined differences of how they would play, the American model was very much like football. By which I mean, if you play football, your position by and large dictates how you are going to play. A defensive end is different than a safety. A quarterback is different than a running back or a left tackle. You have a discrete skill set based on the position that you represent on the field. And we don't ever have a situation where the center is going to drop back and have to throw the football. And we don't ever usually have a situation where a defensive end is going to drop into coverage and have to cover a wide receiver down the field. I mean, sometimes in a zone setting, you can have a zone blitz where you're dropping back and covering an area, but it's not like suddenly J.J. Watt is going to be matched up against A.J. Brown in a game last season between the Texans and the Titans. If that ever happened, that would be a disaster, right? Reason why I bring that up is basketball was taught like it was football. The responsibilities of a center were different than the responsibilities of a point guard. And that led to a very regimented way in which the game was played. And then guess what happened? Euro-style basketball triumphed over American-style basketball. Because what Euros used to be criticized for, oh, look at that big man, he doesn't even want to play inside. He wants to step outside and shoot threes. Do you remember when that was a criticism? That was a monster criticism that people used to say about Euro players. Oh, they're soft. They don't want to step inside and bang inside against the centers. They want to go outside and shoot jumpers. That was an insult. And if you grew up playing basketball like I did, one of the biggest insults a coach could give you if you were a center was, man, you need to be down inside. Why are you fading away? Go up strong, big man. And then what has happened is the Euro style has now triumphed. Used to have flex fours, guys who could go inside, outside, make threes. Now you got everybody on the court almost playing at times the same position, where you have the flex style offense with 5 different guys that can score anywhere on the court, and your prototypical big man doesn't really exist anymore. How does that happen? There's a whole book that could probably be written that would be really intriguing on the way that sports evolve and what becomes an insult later becomes an attribute. Dirk Nowitzki, first ballot NBA Hall of Famer, right? But it was a big insult on Dirk's game early on. Dude's 7 foot. He wants to stand outside and shoot threes. And then after a while, you start to recognize, wait a minute. If he can stand outside and shoot threes, he creates a massive mismatch on the pick and roll. What 5 can go outside and guard him there? And with the value of the three-point shot, Dirk being able to pull a guy away from the basket and drain a shot on him is a lot more valuable than a big man trying to back him down and shoot a hook shot or whatever, or dunk the ball inside if he gets close enough. And so why did the Euro style develop the way that it did? Why did we end up with that style of basketball coming to us from Europe? It's the cross-pollination of sport. It's soccer. In soccer, and this is one reason that I think we've had trouble training soccer in the United States. In soccer, your team can't be incredibly talented unless everybody can seamlessly handle the soccer ball. By which I mean your defender has to be able to make a run and occasionally score, or else it's a lot easier to defend your team. If you can suddenly overlap and send your sweeper on a run to score, and he has the skill set to do it, that's a lot more difficult for a team to match up with. And so what we initially in the United States used to insult was really about the European game being better at developing the same skill sets for all size players. You're a 7-footer in Europe, they expect you to shoot threes well. You were a 7-footer in the United States back in the day, they never wanted you to leave the paint because we taught basketball like it was football. And in Europe, they recognized that basketball and the free-flowing nature of the game needed to more resemble what they did with soccer. And if you watch now, even now, you watch the way we play soccer in the United States versus the way top European teams play soccer, their players are infinitely more technically sound. So this is one of the big illusions that exist out there that the reason why the U.S. doesn't dominate in soccer is because our best athletes don't play soccer. That's what I would say not very sophisticated American sports fans argue. But our issue is not athleticism. Our players are every bit as athletic, if not more so, than many of the European players. Our issue is skill, precision, the ability to pass the ball and work seamlessly within an offense and a defense. The European players have had infinitely more reps. Soccer, in many ways, has as much in common with golf as it does with football. We have this idea that you just throw a great athlete into a sport and they're going to succeed. It doesn't really happen like that in other sports. I'll give you an example. There are lots of guys who we find and plug in to American football that are coming from overseas, and they turn into great players. And they may not have ever played until they were 17 or 18 years old. That never happens in soccer, right? There's never a great American athlete who at 17 years old suddenly moves to Europe and just decides that he's going to play soccer and he becomes excellent at it. It can't happen because you have to develop the skill sets of soccer long before. A little bit like baseball, right? Maybe comparing it to golf is a little bit unkind because golf is much more of I would say less of an athletic sport. You can do it for a long time. You could be a tremendous athlete and not be very good at baseball because it's hard to hit a baseball. It's hard to field a grounder and turn a double play if you haven't done it 10,000 times. In a way, athleticism matters, but there's a substantial skill portion associated with it too. And all of this ties in with my argument about the evolution in the NBA's game. Because what's happened in the NBA as it has become more global is it's become a lot more like soccer. Every player has to be able to handle the ball somewhat decently. They have to be able to score from anywhere on the offensive side of the court. And frankly, with Damian Lillard and Steph Curry now, you can score as soon as you cross half court. Remember, it used to be like, somebody draining a half-court shot, they had to have a running start. They were just throwing it up. There was a lot of luck involved. Damian Lillard and Steph Curry just pull up now. And there's not even any remote chance anybody's going to stop them. And so sometimes there are changes made to a sport, and people don't really understand how those changes are going to impact things. For instance, there are some of you listening right now that remember basketball existing without a three-point shot. And the idea was, basketball has gotten so clogged up, we need to reward and space the floor better, so we will add a three-point line. But I'm not sure that anybody ever foresaw that some of the best marksmen, when it came to shooting three-pointers, would end up being 7-footers. And it's fascinating to think now, and I think Shaq has said this, although it's crazy to even think about. What would Shaquille O'Neal look like today? Right? I watched Shaquille O'Neal play in college at LSU. He was, from the moment he got to LSU, some of you will remember Stanley Roberts, the other big man that he played with, Chris Jackson before he changed his name to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, Del Brown. That was a really fun LSU squad. But Chris Jackson was the shooter, and Shaquille O'Neal was the center on that team. And so the question that I would ask for you to think about this is, as the evolution of the sport has occurred, what would Shaquille O'Neal look like if he were growing up playing basketball today? What would he look like as a high school player? What would he look like as a college player? Shaq has argued, I've seen him say this and they kind of laugh. Shaq has argued that he would be like Giannis. And they have a good time with that. Charles and Kenny do on Inside the NBA. But I do think there's an argument and an element of truth to what Shaq is arguing, because I don't think we would have sent him into the paint and said, hey, big man, never leave here. I think in the modern NBA, Shaq would have to develop an ability to shoot from somewhere other than just inside the basket. Now, the funny thing about that is a lot of you right now are thinking back like, hey, what would Shaquille O'Neal be capable of? The dude couldn't make free throws for his entire career. You're telling me that he's going to be able to step outside, leave the ball handling side of this out of the equation. You telling me Shaq's going to rise up from an NBA distance three and start draining shots? I do think that's funny to think about. And it may well be the case that Shaq, no matter what era he played in, was going to be a prototypical back to the basket center. But those guys are they don't exist. It used to be the unicorn was the 7-footer who could make outside shots. Now the unicorn in the NBA is a traditional center who plays inside throughout. And those are guys that are being exposed and mismatched on a regular basis in the pick and roll, and certainly in the five weave offensive set where everybody's trying to get shots from outside throughout the game. It's really fascinating to think about. And I don't know that very many people have spent much time with you dissecting why the game is played the way that it is now. And I'm saying it's soccer. Basically, basketball has become soccer. And the way that it is followed is a testament to the Euro style. Now, what's also interesting is people like to say, oh, the Euros are soft. Do you know how committed Euro athletes are to their sport? Way more committed, honestly, than American athletes. We're talking about 10, 11, and 12-year-old kids that get identified as having supreme talent, and they put them in these academies, and they basically start training as professionals at 10 or 11 years old. And that's why the European soccer teams play at such a high level, because it's reps. Those kids, by the time they are 14 and 15 years old, have had infinitely more reps than the United States kids have. And that's why frequently our best players in the United States decide to go train in Europe. Well, the same thing is often true when it comes to basketball. And it's why so many Euro players are developing. I mean, think about it for a minute. I know that this kind of goes against the American jingoism because we invented basketball. But sooner or later, LeBron is going to step off the stage in basketball. And the two best players, I think, for the next, let's say that LeBron has 2 or 3 more years decent, I would say within 4 or 5 years, the two best players in the NBA may well be Euros. Luka and Giannis. And they're going to have come out of that Euro system, and it's going to continue to be more and more prevalent in the United States.